He's Howard Eibach, a former copywriter and creative director, and the author of 2 books on the creative brief.
And he's Henry Gomez, an ad agency strategist with 25 years of experience. And together, we're the Brief Brothers, having an ongoing conversation about briefs, briefing, and advertising. Well, today we have a special guest with us, an old colleague of mine. He's not old, but we've known each other for quite a few years. Lance Saunders. I met him in 2007 when he was director of strategy at Campbell Mithun in Minneapolis. And I credit him with being my first creative briefs mentor who set me on the path to studying and reading about the best of what makes a creative brief that resulted in the 2 books that I've written on the topic and doing the workshops that I'm doing. Lance has had an amazing career, and I'm going to let him tell us a little bit about that background. So Lance, thank you so much for joining us. It's great to see you, and welcome to the Brief Brothers.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Howard. Thank you, Henry, for having me. I really appreciate it. I guess I'm newly retired from advertising, and my most recent. Thank you. Oh, you can see it's taken 10 years off my life. I've got to get rid of this grade.
I just had my anniversary, my 25th anniversary in the business, and I texted the guy who got me into the business. And 25 years ago, I walked in an ad agency for the first time, and he texted me back, "Will you ever forgive me?"
Yeah, I like to find the person that recommended me to join an agency. And I was most recently the national president and COO of DDB Canada, in charge of 4 offices. But in terms of briefs and brief writing, prior to that, I was a planning director where I met Howard at Campbell Mithun in Minneapolis. I had a great run there. And before that, I was a planning director at Leo Burnett Canada, and really enjoyed that as well. It was a great creative agency with a very strong pedigree and strategy and brands. And, you know, like a lot of people in North America who became planners, I kind of grew up through the client service ranks and loved branding and brand positioning. Once the creative idea was sold, for me, my passion and enthusiasm kind of waned. I didn't want to go to a shoot. I could care less what the actor and the actress wore. So I really just then made that transition to concentrate on brands and branding, which I loved.
Well, you know, we were having a conversation before the recording started, and you were talking about how you got trained into the all aspects of writing a brief, and how things have changed in the industry. Talk more about that. What's going on? What's on your mind in that subject?
Well, I think, you hate to talk about the good old days, because some of the good old days were not so good, and some of the learning that we're doing now is amazing. But I think in terms of joining an agency back then, and Leo Burnett was private, it wasn't a public agency, so they could afford to have a lot of people on staff, a lot of senior people within the agency. And when you join, they put you through, a huge indoctrination on the Leo Burnett philosophy, but not only that, on media planning, understanding, your client's business and KPIs. And a big part of that was how to write a brief, how to motivate a creative team. And, they would fly you to Chicago from Toronto, for weeks at a time, where you would go and sit with the top creative people and the top strategists at the Leo Burnett Company, and learn from them. And then by the time you finish that, you had a pretty good understanding of creative briefs and how to motivate teams and what's a good creative idea and things of that nature. But that was when Leo Burnett was a public company. When I left my most recent company, it was part of Omnicom, and it's a public company and a great agency. But multinationals are very lean. We had no time to do training. We had binders on our desks with great intentions of what we were going to do to train people. But work and pitches got in the way, and you're doing more with less. And sadly, and shame on us as an industry, the internal training that we promised people who, when they joined the agency, was probably one of the first things to go. But corresponding to that, it was also falling off the wayside of our clients as well. When I joined, when you go into a meeting with P&G, the brand managers knew as much about briefs and brands as you did, or Kellogg's and Coca-Cola. They were spending weeks and months at Unilever understanding, how to write a great brief. But today, they're no longer doing that training. So you might be able to go to an offsite, once a year, or fly down to some conference and, you take a seminar for a couple of hours. But it's really up to you, the individual now, which is sad. But I think it creates a great opportunity for you guys. If I, was back at DDB Canada, I would hire you guys in a heartbeat, because we just don't have the people to train our own people. And then we complain about how the briefs suck and nobody understands them. Well, as I said, shame on us for letting it happen.
I want to react to some of the things you said there. I, by the way, agree 100% with everything that you said. It's unfortunate. I came up in a small agency where, I basically established the strategy and planning practice there because I kind of realized we needed it. And so I was self-taught, and there's some advantages to that, and there's some disadvantages to that. And then I was fortunate enough to work at some of the bigger agencies. I also was in the DDB group for Omnicom. And I was fortunate enough there to have a mentor who was a strategist for whom training was important. In fact, because I was in this self-teaching mode, that's how I found Howard's book. And I ultimately brought Howard to that agency to teach a workshop for us. And I was fortunate enough to have a boss that's, understood that it was important. But I think the consequence of what you're talking about and accurately describing is we have basically two types of strategists today. They're the self-taught ones, the ones that have the incentive and the motivation and the desire, because there are materials out there for strategists if you want to go and find them, find, Stephen King and these greats that, on whose shoulders we should be standing. But unfortunately, a lot of us are not standing on their shoulders because we don't know they existed, right? So those, few that are self-taught and that are, kind of learn from the history. And then there's everybody else. And I think that everybody else, frankly, is a load of crap. They're kids out of college that go straight into a planning and strategy track at an agency, but they don't have any mentors or practical experience. And so they're just kind of, I think we call it fluffing and fleecing their way through it, right? And on the client side, agree as well. It's not just that P&G and Unilever aren't training great marketers for themselves anymore. It's that those were the breeding grounds that from those, incubators came a lot of the marketers in marketing broadly. So I look at the UK, where I think they still take it a lot more seriously than us. They have things like the Institute for the Practitioners of Advertising, right? Like, we don't even consider ourselves practitioners of anything anymore, right? Like, it just feels like our whole industry has really been devalued.
I absolutely agree with you. It seems that is more and more the case today, where we actually are putting in younger people into huge roles of responsibility, but have not given them the tools to work with that we all had growing up. And again, I don't want to focus on the good old days, but at my last agency, we had a subscription, and it amazed me how few people went on to work. The highest usage of work was myself and our head of planning, and we had young planners, young client service people. We're not providing the training. There's amazing articles and points of view written there, but people didn't even go on there to look up the information, which infuriated me to no end. Because to your point, Henry, sadly, you have to be self-taught, and you have to be curious to want to grow your skill set as well. And if I'm not getting it from the organization I joined, then it behooves you to do it on your own. But I found, didn't have people doing that.
Reflecting back on my personal experience, I think because I never envisioned when I was in college, I never envisioned working in advertising, and it was kind of a second career for me. And I came into advertising, and I didn't come in as a strategist. I kind of came in as an office errand boy, and worked in all different types of positions in the agency before I established. I think I came at it with a much more humble approach, which was, I think we have a need for strategy in this agency, but I don't know anything about strategy, so I have to teach myself. I think that maybe kids today are fooling themselves as like, well, I went to college for it, or I went to the ad school and did the planning track. I don't know that they're coming at it with the humility of an outsider like I was, which was, I don't know anything about this, so behooves me to learn about it and kind of teach myself. That's a very unique set of circumstances, right? I think that agencies are doing a disservice to themselves and to the clients that are paying us millions and millions of dollars, right? That we're not inculcating this atmosphere of learning and this that, hey, there's a way that things work and that have worked for decades. And by the way, just because the media has changed and consumer behaviors have changed and we all carry mobile phone, that doesn't mean that the fundamentals of how to communicate, what motivates people, the things that you look at, the Bill Bernbach interviews that are on YouTube, and you hear him talking about, he wasn't a strategist. It was before strategy was born, but he was a brilliant ad man. He says, what drives a man? What are his motivations? Those things don't change, and it behooves us to learn those things. So
absolutely.
And I am a grumpy old man, and I will say the good old days.
Yeah.
Well, Lance, what are some of the consequences of our lack of training and our loosening of our skills about the briefs? How is that hurting advertising? How is that building a brands?
Well, I think in two ways. One, the ideas may not be as strong as we hope to be in terms of providing creative breakthrough and doing the kind of work that the agency hopes to be recognized for. And then as a result of that, the clients' brands are suffering because we're not delivering on the objectives that were set forth in the brief. You could see them that we don't have proper KPIs. They're too broad. They're all about we need to generate awareness. I saw a brief the other day that the issue was 87% of people were aware of the issue, but nothing had taken place. But the brief said we need to raise awareness. Well, I don't think awareness is the issue at 87%. I think action or behavioral change is the issue. So I think with that you can see it. I think clients are less trusting. I think of agencies. Agencies are not sitting at the grown-ups table. They're more downstream at the executional table. And if I can't find the answer here, I'll find it somewhere else. I mean, when I was starting in the business, young brand managers on Kellogg's would threaten the agency. I'm going to fire the agency. And the head of client service said, you've been a client of ours for 50 years. You think you're going anywhere? You're like, shut up, and listen to what we're trying to help you with. But now all the clients are looking, if I can't find it here, I'll look for it somewhere else.
So I just had an aha moment, and I'm a little slow, so maybe I should have had this aha moment, years ago. But everything you described 100%, and I think it's a vicious cycle, right? Like the work is worse, so then budgets get cut, and then budgets get cut, which means less training, which means the work is going to be, so it's a vicious cycle. So agree 100% there. But I think we talk all the time about creativity and the role of creativity, and is there a role and we need to do better creative so that the agencies can take their rightful place back, where they were in the C-suite advising the aha moment was, you're not going to get to that. It's about strategy. When they fire the agency and they hire McKinsey, it's not because of the creativity. It's because you didn't understand the business. You didn't have a sound approach to their business. You didn't have a good strategy that led to good creative, that led to good business results. So I think stop talking about creativity. The good creativity will come when you have good strategy, and you can't have good strategy unless you have smart people that are trained to do advertising strategy.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I was on a webinar in Canada a couple of weeks ago that I was hosting a roundtable, and it was on ageism in our business. And we're one of the very few industries that, we eat our young, other than being an NFL football player who has,
We eat our old.
our short shelf life. There's no industry that has a shorter shelf life. And those senior people, creatives, client service, planning heads, are no longer at the agency, and clients recognize that. But it's partly clients' fault because of retainers. There's no retainers, and scopes, the scopes of works and blended hourly rates. We can't afford to have too many senior people at our agencies anymore.
We could talk for hours about whose fault it is, because there's a counter argument, which is, well, who started merging these agencies together and stripping out the media component from the
Right.
from that creative component and making it a fee for time, as opposed to, hey, let's take your whole budget, we're going to place it, and we're going to give you the creative because there's enough money in the pot to be able to do that. And that was the agencies that did that. Sir Martin, he's not here anymore, and I'm at WPP. I got to be careful what I say, but it was him and people like him that merged these agencies and did these things that basically created a race to zero profit margin, in which everything is getting skinned as if it were fat. But to your point is, you have this wealth of experience, and they're all being shown the door because they make too much money, and there isn't enough fat on the bone to be able to pay them. But then the work suffers, and then you get 10% budget cuts each year until the budget is nothing.
Yeah.
Okay, so what do we do, Lance? What's the answer? How do we fix this?
Well, I don't know if the discussion is how do we fix briefs and brief writing, or how do we fix the industry, which is probably a larger topic. But
well, if you take Henry's premise, which I think there's some truth to, that it's a strategy, not creativity, that's a problem. That's grounded in brief training and brief writing, and the belief that we can, as an industry, write and produce a great inspired brief.
And I think I notice more and more when, just before I left the agency, when you're competing against other agencies on pitches and things like that. Other agencies would be hiring a senior planner or senior strategist, someone who got let go or couldn't take it anymore, and wanted to freelance for less hassle and more money, and a senior creative team. But I think so the client in the short term got some short-term strategic thinking that helped their business, either from a strong strategist or a strong creative team. But then those people left because they were freelance and went on to another project. And then the agency's kind of left floundering to try and figure it out after that idea is executed. And the agencies that we all admire, the Crispin Porters, the BBHs, the Goodbees, their planning departments were firing on all cylinders. That for whatever reason they decided they valued that within the agency, and they figured out a way to make the financial cuts elsewhere in order to have. I've got to have a strong planning department. I have to have a strong creative department, and maybe I don't need as many client service people anymore. Maybe I don't need. I'll outsource my production department. I don't need television producers on staff, but I definitely need people who can think their way out of a problem, and I definitely need strong creative people who can execute, out of that conundrum as well. But I was running a large agency, and I made those decisions too, where we let some really solid strategists and creative people go because we had to make the numbers, not that quarter, but that month. And, at the first sign of, you've lost a new piece of business, there's no faith that you're going to re-win another one, next month. It's you got to make those changes right now. And to your point, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy and a spiral downward to where we are now. And to what I said before, which creates a great opportunity for you guys, as senior strategist, helping clients. Henry, I know you're working with an agency now, but some of the best people I think are out freelancing now as well, either advising clients or advising agencies. And for some reason, agencies can find a way in the short period to bring them in for 4 to 6 weeks at $2,000 a day or $5,000, whatever it is. But we can't afford to give the junior planner a 5% bump from $55,000 to $60,000. We can't get that approved by New York. But I can find a way in new business to hire a planner for 15 grand for a week. It was ridiculous.
Yeah, a man after my own heart.
Yeah. Well, why don't we kind of take a slight turn here and talk some specifics about briefs, because I know you've got some thoughts, Lance. And I mentioned this to you in an email in prep for our discussion today. One of the things that you said in an article that was published a few years ago that I glommed onto and I used in my second book on how to write a single-minded proposition. It's very simple, very straightforward, and I think it's accepted wisdom, but I think it's worth further examination. And it's a favorite line of mine, and it's something you said: facts tell, emotions sell. As a creative, I get that. That's easy. But sometimes we're talking to clients who don't quite grasp the idea that I don't need to pile on facts, information to make my sale. When I start moving into the emotion territory, it's a little scary, and I have to make sometimes a tough decision. You pointed out quite, I think, accurately, this isn't just advertising, this is brain science. You want to, elaborate on that a bit?
Well, sure, and it kind of goes back to what Henry said, but really understanding the basics of human motivation. And they haven't changed, but you do have to understand what's the difference between Snapchat and TikTok. But if you can understand what drives the human motivation behind that, for example, I'm a photographer now, retired, and I'm on Instagram. So is it really my love or my desire to want to feel love or affirmation for my work? Is that what's the human motivation of driving people towards Instagram? So if you understand what's the human motivation driving some of our decision maker, it's constant. And to that point that you had mentioned, Howard, there's another neuroscientist in Canada, Dr. Donald Calne, Calne, and he says that ration leads to conclusion, but emotion leads to action. And there's never a better phrase for an advertising agency to use. And he wasn't the creative director at BBH or Goodby. He's a neuroscientist who understands how we function as a human species. And, we have, all this knowledge. We now know that, the vast majority of our decision making, 80 to 90%, is emotionally based, and we post-rationalize that later from Daniel Kahneman.
Oh yeah,
But myself and our planning director, we would often quote that to our clients. Again, this is not the DDB creative philosophy. This is how our brains work. And clients would nod and go, yeah, it makes sense. But now my brief is I need to launch 5G, the new 5G network, and I need to say this, 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 and this. And I go, did you not understand what we've just said for the last year? I know that it's different because we really have a lot to say about this. And you go,
it's amazing. You could be a third brief brother here, how much I agree with you. I think part of that is this trend, like we're seeing, like all of these kids coming out with MBAs and everything is so analytical. And so, we forget that just like it's all emotion, there's an artistic part to this, right? There's an artistic part to creativity. And, Picasso didn't get reactions out of people because he calculated, where he was going to put the paint stroke. Is about raw emotion. Now, I'm not pretentious enough to think that advertising is art for art's sake, but it is art in the service of commerce. And so moving people, it's not a rational, and your point about, nobody needs a Mercedes Benz, right? You post rationalize that buying that Mercedes or that Ferrari gives you some sort of emotional, it scratches an itch that you have that a lot of times you're not even aware of. And Howard and I talk about this with regard to insights and briefs. It's like, I'm not going to go to the consumer and ask him what the insight is, because the consumer may not even know that about himself. It's us as outsiders, as observers of humanity, of the mental frailty, of the frailties of the human condition, that have to know what are the motivators. I think it's really one of the things that I find hilarious is how civilians, people that don't work in advertising, think that advertisers and advertising agencies are manipulating them constantly. If we knew half as much as they think we know about how to manipulate them, we would all be millionaires. But that's not the case. Like I call it like this, it's a 747 piloted by monkeys. Like we're just pushing buttons and pulling levers. And there are some people like Daniel Kahneman who have a better grasp of how decisions are made, but that doesn't really filter down into most agencies, and forget about most clients. So I just agree 100% with everything you said.
I mean, to me, that part to what you're saying, Henry, is shocking that the vast majority of clients don't know that about how our brains work, because it should be guiding every decision they make as a CMO. If they know it, they might have glanced at a short article in Ad Age, but and it's over, it's forgotten, because we're an industry of here's the next cool thing. So that was cool, whatever. Wasn't that 4 years ago? No, it was 4,000 years ago that the way our brains were formed, and it hasn't changed in 2021. So why are we not doing that? And and then as an agency, we had this strong belief system about emotion over ration. And it's not to say that ration isn't required, and I can talk about that later. When the consumer moves from being a consumer and a shopper, if I'm thinking about buying a car, I need to have some kind of emotional resonancy about the BMW, the Mercedes, the Volkswagen, of how it's going to make me feel driving it, but how does the communication make me feel in terms of eliciting an emotional response? But at some point, I need to know, can I afford that car? I need to have all-wheel drive for Canadian winters. I need to have this, that, or the other thing. It's not to say that the facts don't matter, but the facts matter, I think, when the consumer moves from a consumer to a shopper, and where and when they need to hear those specifics of the message is really important. But what we tend to do is throw it all in.
Oh, yep.
It's talk about the all-wheel drive, talk about our new drivetrain, talk about our performance, talk about the amazing German engineering. Oh, and by the way, your job is to wrap it up with some kind of very strong emotional message.
I learned a valuable lesson about that, Lance, when I worked at Team One Advertising in El Segundo, California, which does all the advertising for Lexus. It was launched in the mid-'80s. And my boss, Tom Cordner, was the guy who wrote the line, the relentless pursuit of perfection. And why that's gone away is beyond me, but that's another story. But they had a collateral department, as most agencies who did automotive work did. And the collateral department created those glossy 6 and 8 color, beautiful photographed brochures that, for the most part, don't exist anymore because everybody goes online. But I discovered, what is this, going on 20 years ago, when I asked the question, it says, where does this document fit or fall in the purchase decision process? Is it in the beginning, the middle, of the end? And it turns out it comes at the end, after they purchase the automobile, because they made the purchase based on how the car made them feel. They picked up the brochure to give them the rational justification for their emotional decision, because the brochure had all the reliability information, the warranty information, the safety information, and the performance information. It still had pretty pictures. It still had powerful emotional messages, but it was the rational part of the decision. Now that's something I figured out 20 years ago.
Right.
But as you said, this is much older than that. But yet we still don't know, or at least brands still don't know that information.
Hey,
That's scary.
hey Lance, I have a question for you. It just occurred to me. Where do you come down on Byron Sharp and the idea of mental availability and those, in terms, he kind of, in my world, he revolutionized things in 2010 with how brands grow. Where do you fall with regards to him versus kind of traditional marketing philosophy and approaches?
I think he's brilliant in terms of what he's added to the conversation in marketing and branding today, because he has a very strong point of view, but it's backed up with facts. It's not just what he thinks and what he feels. As an academic, he has a huge amount of data and to back up his point of view. So I think he is, trying very hard. I love reading whatever he writes, but to some extent, it's falling on deaf ears. And to Howard's point, one of the things, why did they get rid of the relentless pursuit of perfection? When I worked on Tony the Tiger, every creative team would say, "Isn't the tiger kind of tired? Can we do a Tony the Tiger ad without Tony?" And I remember the president of the company going, "Every creative team that comes into our office wants to kill Tony the Tiger. He's been here for 75 years for a reason, but it's not cool."
Leo invented basically every ad. Like, the agency was built on inventing advertising icons that people would rapidly associate, and that kind of gets back to Byron Sharp, right? And
exactly.
mental right?
And this is why we have ageism, because kids are put in a position of making decisions, when I think someone who's a little older and wiser would understand the need for continuity. It's called equity. But if you have equity in a tagline like the relentless pursuit of perfection, why would you throw that away? I don't get it. And that's in so many.
Is perfection any less desirable in an automobile today than it was when they launched it?
I mean, think of how many brands out there have changed their tagline, their public-facing language, simply because someone got tired of it. It's throwing away equity.
What you guys were talking about earlier, Paul Fedwick's new book, and he talks about I think the way that we define creativity at agencies is not the real way that we should be defining creativity. And the way we define it from an agency point of view is something that's never been done before, something that's so arresting, something that's so jarring, that can be in your face. And that's not necessarily what's required all of the time. It's to take what's been done before and to add on to it and make it better. But we're very much about, it's not creative if I've seen it or it's been done before. And clients will come in and kill amazing campaigns because they've changed companies, and it's wasn't developed under their regime. Or agencies getting a new piece of business want to kill a campaign as well, or a creative team wants to kill a campaign because I need something fresh and new that hasn't been done before.
I love it when they go into the wilderness after getting rid of a long-running campaign and then come back to it because they realize it's like the admission of the error in their ways is 100%. I think tying it back to how we started the conversation, and I want to get back a little bit to the Byron Sharp thing. I think you're right. I think, and I agree with you, I think that what he's done is he has taken a lot of the mystery out of how consumers think and buy, and particularly how they act in buying situations, and he's backed it up with data. So it's kind of he has the rational data to prove why certain things are really easy to understand. It's like, you're only going to buy the brand that you have the most mental availability for in your mind at the moment that you're buying. So I think, to your point earlier about education, in a perfect world, in a utopia of how do we get back and talking about strategy, I think that if the more clients kind of sign on to that philosophy of the fact-based, data-based approach. And I don't mean data and like the data says, it's like the data is how people buy, like how people actually, how their brain works and what has been proven to have worked. If we can have a few brands that inculcate their people with that, and then therefore the agencies must understand that, I think that then we could have a resurgence of that creativity that we all want. But it's got to start with some of these bigger brands, signing on and saying, this is our philosophy. We need to teach it to anybody who's in marketing, and our agencies have to sign off on this. I know that it's difficult from the agency side, like the tail can't wag the dog. I can't bring my big clients, I'm a strategist at their multicultural agency. I'm not going to change their entire way of thinking
Right.
about it. But at some point, the rubber has to meet the road, and the CMO has to say, hey, I'm going to try this. And everybody here's got to learn this.
And going back to what you were saying at your agency about having a proper brief, there's no question briefs have evolved and are evolving. Now that I'm newly retired, I took a part-time job as a professor teaching advertising strategy to students, and I went on a kind of a worldwide search for the greatest new creative brief. It's something that I'm always interested in, kind of like looking for the lost ark of the covenant. And there's no question that they're evolving. But I think whatever agency has for their brief, you need to have a point of view. You need to have your own brief that is a rallying cry for the agency. This is what we believe as a company. This is what we espouse to our clients. This is what we believe and how we believe brands will grow. And the self-serving part of it is, one, I think it helps for the culture of the agency to have a strong point of view in your brief. But also, two, when you stand up in front of a room to attract more clients, you then have a point of view that you can articulate. All of these creative examples are different. All these briefs are different. All these challenges were different. But the steel thread that weaves through each of these briefs is this belief in the brief. This is what we stand for as an agency. This is our flag that we rally around. Because I know it's funny, I was talking to some friends of mine when I said, hey, can you send me your latest brief? And I'm looking for briefs to teach, first year students. And they go, we don't do briefs anymore. They're too old fashioned. We're kind of postmodern. I go, postmodern? What are you talking about? They go, well, we just kind of write something up and everybody writes up their own point of view. And I go, no, that's not going to work. Because then at the end of it, when you look at your body of work and you say, how did you get there? And what do you believe as an agency in terms of your creative philosophy and your strategic philosophy? And how's that going to help me on my business? I don't know what you point to, where we all know that, when Kevin Roberts talked about love marks, it was about love. When BBH talked about disruption, it was about disruption. When Alex Bogusky talked about, write the press brief, it was about connecting to culture and getting your idea talked about in mainstream media. They're all right in the sense that they have the proof of their actions and their philosophy through a great body of work. And I don't think one is better than the other, but they all definitely work for that agency and they all rallied around that. So
were you able to get your hands on a brief, and did you see something about a new or relatively new brief, Lance, that you found interesting, insightful?
Well, I don't know if it was insightful, but it was fun. When I did look at the briefs, I did notice that there is a trend, and it makes sense. If you're talking to creative people, design matters. That the briefs appear to be much more well designed. And I think that's not just from an aesthetic point of view, but why is that not even just good enough? Because again, that's what draws them, aesthetics of thing. They care about fonts and the way that things are laid out. And I think some agencies now are really considering the aesthetics of the brief. The other thing that agencies are adding to their briefs, from what I saw, is not just what is it we want to say, but some of the briefs are not even saying that anymore. It's not about what's the the RTB or the reason to believe, or what's the unique selling proposition, or what's the emotional selling proposition. They're not even saying what the proposition is. They are saying, though, what is the feeling that we want to evoke from people after seeing our communication? Or what feeling do we want to evoke, or what behavior do we want to incite?
Yeah.
And I think that's a pretty interesting way of doing it, because it leaves it open. It doesn't mean the brief doesn't have a great understanding of the target audience, the problem we're trying to solve, a great human, cultural, brand, category insight that marries the problem in an interesting way that we haven't thought of before. But rather than saying, what's a single-minded thing we want to say, what is the feeling or behavior that we want people to take as a result of this communication?
I love that.
I think what you described a little bit earlier, and you just kind of came back to it now, is the different top creative agencies have all developed different kind of black box methodologies for their creative briefs, but more importantly, they've rigorously stuck to that black box, right? And that's when they've had their best. It doesn't matter what the black box is, as long as it's kind of well thought out and you have some rigor and stick to it, because at the end, all of the creative is going to hang together, to your point, and it's not just a random hodgepodge of, oh, I had this idea and I had this idea and nobody knows what the hell they're doing. I think it's more important to be organized around a philosophy than what that actual philosophy is.
Right. The brief that I thought was fun, that was really unique, and I may be pronouncing the agency wrong, but it's Young von Matt out of Stockholm, and Jun von Matt, and they're in Stockholm, and they have a great brief, and it's got the 6 or 7 boxes that we're all kind of familiar with. They might be slightly different, but at the center of it is they call it their BRI, BRI, and I think it's their common goal, or what's the message that we want to communicate. But it's physically written on a beer coaster that you can lift from the creative brief, because after the briefing is over, then you go to the bar with the coaster and discuss it. So their kind of philosophy is around maybe discourse, to what Vivek was talking about, the collaboration and the need to have a discussion around the brief. And so literally they had a physical coaster, and apparently they go to a bar and talk about it, which I thought was fun.
So Lance, this brief you're talking about, have you seen a completed brief or just a template?
Just a template.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because have you been able to get your hands on an actual brief finished?
No, but I have reached out to them, and I'm hoping to hear back, but it didn't come. I didn't hear anything.
You know what happens to me when I do that is say, "Oh yeah, we know what you do. We'd love to contribute," and then I never hear from them.
Yeah,
because they know what I do for a living. They don't want to be, it's proprietary. It's you're revealing your
box.
Yeah. But it's published. I mean, they talk about it. I mean, the one thing that I have found, which is amazing today, unlike when I was starting out, because there was no information, it's just the amount of generosity there is with planners and strategists around the world. I have found that I have reached out to competitive agencies, Crispin Porter and BBH and Goodby, and asked them a couple of questions and said, hey, I'm running an agency in Toronto, admire your thinking, can you help me with this? And more often than not, the planner got back to me. I think we kind of see where there's a camaraderie. We're all in this together. We're kind of all alone. But just, the amount of writing that people, if there's something I really admire about young planners and young strategists today, is how prolific they are in writing on the internet and sharing that knowledge with everyone. Because I do think there is a lot of knowledge in a lot of these books. My Bible back then, I think, was John Steele's book, Truth, Lies, and Planning, which I still recommend today, and I recommended it to some student a month ago. They go, it's like 25 years old. I go, yeah, it doesn't really matter. It could be 25 minutes ago he wrote it. It's still applicable today.
It's still good. Definitely.
But
it's amazing that phenomenon of if it wasn't written today, it's not.
Yeah, I teach a brief that was written by the Richards Group for Kiwi shoe polish, and Henry and I have talked about it before. And the document is 15, 20 years old, and the template, I love the template. At the top of the brief, after it says Richards Creative Brief, it has 4 sentences. It says, people don't read ads. People don't like ads. People don't believe ads. What will make this one different? And that's that's like a taunt. It's a taunt to the brief writer. All right, come on, what do you got? Show me.
A great one.
And that hasn't changed. That template has been in use by the Richards Group 20, 25 years. Hasn't changed.
No, it's true.
Well, Lance, I think we've talked about a wide range of things, and I could definitely envision you coming back and with talk about different subjects. But it's been really phenomenal. I want to thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, and best of luck to the both of you. Much success.
We appreciate it, and it's great seeing you again. And congratulations on your retirement, and congratulations on your teaching. We want to hear more about that, maybe in a future conversation.
Fabulous. Thank you, guys.
Okay, Henry, we're back with a look at our creative review, and today we're going to view a spot for Subaru Forester. Let's take a look.
The Subaru Forester. Dog tested, dog approved.
Okay. What do you think, Henry?
Well, the dogs are cute. Really cute. So I think Subaru is an interesting brand because it's a niche brand, and it's a brand that has a core loyal following. And we've seen advertising from them that talks about like how these vehicles stay in the family for a long time. And we've seen vehicle commercials with dogs, and I think they've been associated a lot with being a very dog-friendly vehicle. Remembering, now everybody drives an SUV, but that Forester has been around a long time, and it was one of those first kind of, as our society has become more dog friendly, right? And people are taking their dogs everywhere with them, taking them on vacation and on road trips. Subaru was kind of there in that cultural zeitgeist moment with the dogs. I think this commercial takes that to the extreme, right? Where the driver, the passengers are dogs. It is fun in the way that it kind of is reminiscent of that family car trip that we've all probably experienced. And as a child, sitting in the back seat and telling the 18-wheel truck driver to honk the horn, and when he would do it, it was always like this big thing, like, yay, he saw me and he did it. So there's a lot to kind of make you have warm feelings about this. And then their tagline is "Love Subaru," right? So for them, I don't think you're going to confuse the brand because of their close association with dogs over the years. Nothing objectionable here. Is it super creative? No. I think it's a cute spot.
And I can't go beyond that, really. I mean, you've kind of hit the high points. You've also hit a couple of the low points. I agree that it hits the cuteness factor really hard. I'm not as intimately familiar with the brand as you are, so I can't talk to its history. Although I am aware of it from a cultural perspective, it's been around for a long time. But if the standard here, and that I think the standard has to be, is this outstanding, emotionally driven creative? It fails. It's cute. It maybe is memorable if you care about Subaru, but if you are on the edge, if you are sitting on the fence about, I'm thinking about a new car, is a Subaru on my radar? Is this going to push me over the edge to Subaru? I doubt it. You'd have
I think if you're already in the Subaru cult, you're gonna like this.
Exactly.
But it's not gonna do anything to proselytize new people to come in.
No. So the question I ask is there a purpose beyond, or what was the purpose? If I had the brief in front of me and it said, the question was, what's the problem? What problem are we trying to solve here? I would say this communicates no problem. Why are we advertising? It's just like, we just got to keep advertising.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard many of my workshop attendees who are filling out briefs or share briefs with me say, when they answer the question, why are we advertising? They use the word, well, we're trying to create awareness. I said, well, what brand does not want to create awareness? That's not a real reason to advertise. That's a pretty wimpy reason to advertise. Give me a solid problem that I can tackle, and that's going to have a deep impact on how I, as a creative, will go search for an answer. So this is like, well, I don't know why they're advertising here.
Yeah, and awareness, I think it is a reasonable goal for some brands that are new, that aren't, particularly known. But I think awareness.
I wouldn't say awareness then. If it was a brand new product, I would say, teach me, excite me about a brand new product. But it's, awareness is like, it's pretty wishy-washy.
Yeah, like, I'm aware, so what? Like,
exactly,
you exist. Like, that's barely above you don't exist. Like, okay, so now you exist, so what? But yeah, I think awareness is a word that gets thrown around a lot by lazy ad people. And certainly, I think here, you go to their tagline, dog, or not the step up line, you say dog tested, dog approved. Again, I think they're treading in an area where they're already known for that. Like,
yeah.
It's not telling me anything new. Like, is there a new innovation that makes this even better? We were the first to make a dog-friendly vehicle, and we continue to but that's not there. It's just kind of like you accept the fact that they're a dog-friendly vehicle. Okay, so what?
I mean, you could say this is a bit of borrowed interest. You're using dogs and people's love for dogs to connect with the brand. Think about what Volkswagen did a few years ago for the Super Bowl spot, using that little kid dressed up as Darth Vader. That was heavily borrowed interest, but people loved that spot because it was that was cuteness to the nth degree, right? Mm-hmm. But they loved that spot because it had an emotional connection. You really drove home. Sorry, that's a bad pun, but it really drove home a point about the car, the innovation of the car, and it was unforgettable. Is this unforgettable? I would say only if you love Subaru. If you're not a Subaru fan,
Yeah. So I think that the emotion of the gag that the father plays on the son in the Volkswagen commercial is a much more deeply powerful one. And by the way, incredibly well acted by the kid. Like, when he sees the thing, turn on and the lights turn on, he's like, even through the costume, you could see the,
right.
Whereas the highlight in the Subaru commercial is kind of like a little recognition of, oh yeah, I remember when I did that, but it's not that powerful. Like, this dad really dazzled the child with,
Is it an unexpected? I mean, I was pretty much expecting that. I was just, okay, okay, here he goes. He blows the horn. Yeah, it's not a surprising. There's no twist to it. None.
Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah. So kind of thumbs down here, Siskel and Ebert, for Subaru. It's for me, a marginal thumbs down.
Yeah. No good. All right, Henry. He's Henry Gomez.
And he's Howard Eibach, and together we're the Brief Brothers. Till next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.